Have you ever had a moment where your entire future felt so solid you could touch it? You've picked the flowers, you've tasted the cake, you've seen the dress hanging on the door, and you know exactly what your life is going to look like for the next 50 years. My name is Violet, and on the night before I was supposed to say I do, my world didn't just crumble, it evaporated. I want to ask you something before we begin. If you found out the person you were about to commit your soul to was actually a complete stranger, a man with a history of disappearing and leaving broken families in his wake, would you want to know the truth before you walk down that aisle? Or would you rather live in the beautiful, perfect lie for just one more day? Drop a comment right now. Truth or lie? I want to see where your heart is, because my fiancé, Jonathan Pierce, didn't give me a choice. He just gave me 7 words and a silence that nearly destroyed me. This is the story of the man who wasn't there. And it starts with a buzz on a nightstand that sounded like a funeral bell. The air in my childhood bedroom felt like it was made of glass, thin, sharp, and ready to shatter. It was 11:42 p.m. In less than 12 hours, I was supposed to be standing in the garden of the estate down the road, holding a bouquet of white peonies and looking into the eyes of Jonathan Pierce. I was already in that half-sleep state, the kind where your dreams are just a frantic rehearsal of the ceremony. The house was full of the soft, domestic sounds of a wedding eve. Down the hall, I could hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of my father. In the guest rooms, my bridesmaids, girls I'd known since kindergarten, were tucked away, their silk robes already laid out for the morning getting ready photos. The house was humming with the anticipation of a new beginning. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a small sound, but in the silence of that room, it felt like a physical blow. I reached out, my hand brushing against the lace of my wedding veil, which was draped over the nightstand. I picked up the phone, the blue light blinding me for a second, searing the image into my retinas. One new message. Jonathan. My heart did that hopeful little skip it always did when I saw his name. I thought it would be a sweet dreams text, or maybe a can't wait to see you at the altar note. Instead, it was 7 words, no punctuation at the end, just a raw, jagged edge of a sentence. I'm sorry, Violet, I can't do this. I stared at the screen until the letters began to swim and blur. I waited. I waited for the follow-up. I waited for the just kidding or the I'm just having cold feet, call me. I watched for those 3 little dancing dots that meant he was typing an explanation, a retraction, a heartbeat. But the bubbles never appeared. The screen just went black, reflecting my own pale, confused face back at me. I called him immediately. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ring, ring, ring. You've reached Jonathan, leave a message. His voice, so calm, so steady, so him, sounded like it was coming from another planet. I called again, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Where are you? Jonathan, this isn't funny. Please call me. Is this a joke?" Nothing. I sat up in bed, the silk of my nightgown feeling suddenly cold against my skin. I looked over at my wedding dress, hanging on the wardrobe door. It looked like a ghost in the moonlight. It was a beautiful, expensive thing, heavy with embroidery and hope. I had spent 3 months getting it altered so it would fit me perfectly, like a second skin. Now it just looked like an empty shell, a costume for a play that had been canceled without notice. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet flinching as they touched the cold hardwood floor. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain, hoping against hope that I'd see his car, that he was just outside, too nervous to come in. But the driveway was empty. Jonathan's silver sedan, which had been parked there only 3 hours ago when he dropped me off after the rehearsal dinner, was gone. The panic didn't come all at once. It was a slow, rising tide that started at my toes and moved to my throat. I thought about the rehearsal dinner. He had been quiet, yes, but Jonathan was the still waters run deep type.
He had made a toast, he had thanked my parents for welcoming him into the family, he had kissed my hand and told me I looked radiant. How could a man say those things at 8 p.m. and delete himself by midnight? I went downstairs, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I checked the back door. Locked. I checked the front door. Locked. I peered into the darkness of the street, half expecting to see him standing under a streetlight waiting for me to find him, but there was only the wind in the trees and the distant sound of a dog barking. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, clutching my phone, staring at the front door as if I could make him materialize through the wood. The house felt different now. The wedding decorations in the dining room, the jars of favors, the stacks of programs, looked like relics of a lost civilization. I didn't know then that Jonathan Pierce didn't exist. Not really. I didn't know that I was just the latest stop in a life he had been reinventing for a decade. I was sitting on a staircase waiting for a man who had already turned into smoke.
The silence of a house at 3 a.m. is different when you're waiting for a ghost. Usually, the quiet feels protective, like a blanket. But that night, the silence felt predatory. Every creak of the floorboards above me, my mother shifting in her sleep, my bridesmaids dreaming of bouquets, felt like a ticking clock. I was the only one awake in a world that was about to end. I stared at the sent status on my messages to Jonathan. No read receipt, no response. My thumb hovered over his contact photo, a picture of us at a pumpkin patch last October. He was laughing, his arm draped over my shoulder, looking every bit like the man who would never leave. It was a lie in high definition. I couldn't just sit there. My skin felt too tight for my body. I needed a voice, any voice, to tell me I was overreacting. I scrolled through my contacts until I hit Paul. Paul was the best man. He and Jonathan had been inseparable for the 4 years I'd known them. They worked together, played golf together, and Paul was the one who helped Jonathan pick out my engagement ring. If Jonathan had a secret, Paul was the vault it was kept in. I hit call. It rang 4 times before a groggy, confused voice answered. "Violet? Is everything okay? It's 3 in the morning, kid." "Paul," my voice broke, sounding small and jagged. "Jonathan's gone." There was a long pause on the other end. I expected a laugh. I expected him to say, "He's just at the hotel, Violet. He's got cold feet. Calm down." But the silence that stretched between us was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone isn't surprised, just disappointed. "What do you mean, gone?" Paul finally asked. "He sent me a text, 7 words. He said he can't do this, and now his phone is off. His car is gone. Paul, tell me he's with you. Tell me you guys are just playing some stupid, cruel prank." I heard Paul sit up. I heard the rustle of sheets and a heavy, ragged sigh. "He's not here, Violet. I dropped him off at your parents' place after the rehearsal. He seemed okay. Nervous, yeah, but he kept talking about the honeymoon. He kept talking about Hawaii. Then why did he leave?" I whispered, hot tears finally stinging my eyes. "People don't just evaporate, Paul. Did he say anything? Anything at all that felt off?" Paul was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "He asked me something," Paul said, his voice dropping an octave. "We were having a drink before I dropped him off. He looked at his glass and asked me if he thought a person could ever really escape their past. If you could just close a door on who you used to be and never look back." My heart skipped a beat. A cold chill washed over me, despite the warmth of the hallway. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that the past always has a way of finding a crack in the door. I told him honesty was the only way to keep the door shut." Paul paused, and I could hear the hesitation in his breath. "Violet, I've known Jonathan for years, but tonight he looked like a man who was looking for a way out of a burning building." I hung up shortly after, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. Escape the past.
I thought I knew Jonathan's past. I knew he was an only child. I knew his parents had passed away in a car accident when he was in his early 20s. I knew he had moved around for work before settling here. But as I sat on those stairs, the shadows in the hallway seemed to lengthen. I realized I didn't know the names of his childhood friends. I had never seen a high school yearbook. I had never met a single person from his life before he arrived in our city 4 years ago. He hadn't just moved here. He landed here like a traveler with no luggage. I looked up at the top of the stairs. My mother would be waking up in 3 hours. The hair and makeup team would be arriving at 7 a.m. The caterers were already loading the trucks. I was standing in the middle of a high-speed train wreck, and I was the only one who could see the tracks disappearing into nothing. I went into the kitchen and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the Save the Date magnet on our fridge. Violet and Jonathan. Forever starts today. The sun was beginning to bleed through the horizon, a pale, sickly gray. The morning of my wedding had arrived, and for the first time in my life, I understood that you can live with someone for 4 years, sleep beside them, dream with them, and still be staring at a complete and total stranger.
The first sound of the morning wasn't the birds or the alarm clock. It was the floorboards creaking upstairs, the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of my mother. In any other universe, this would have been the happiest morning of her life. She'd spent 18 months obsessing over lace patterns and floral arrangements. For her, today was a victory lap. For me, it was a funeral. I was still sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in, wearing her mother of the bride silk robe. She stopped dead when she saw me. I was still in my nightgown, my eyes bloodshot, my hair a tangled mess. Violet, good heavens, why aren't you in the shower? The glam team will be here in 20 minutes. She bustled over to the coffee maker, her energy vibrating at a frequency I couldn't match. We have so much to do. Did you get any sleep at all? You look like you've seen a... She stopped. She finally looked at my face, not as a bride, but as her daughter. Jonathan's gone, Mom. The coffee carafe clattered against the machine. The silence that followed was deafening. I told her about the text. I told her about the empty driveway. I watched her face go through a dozen stages of grief in 30 seconds. Denial, fury, and then a crushing maternal panic. He's just nervous, Violet. Your father almost bolted too. He's probably just driving around, clearing his head. We'll call him. We'll call his hotel. I've called, Mom. Paul called. His phone is dead. He's not clearing his head. He's gone. By 8 a.m., the house was a war zone. My father was on the phone in the study, his voice booming as he demanded the police do something, only to be told that a grown man leaving a text message isn't a missing person, it's a breakup. My bridesmaids had arrived, and that celebration had curdled into a wake. They stood in the living room in their matching robes, holding glasses of mimosa they didn't want to drink, whispering in corners. I felt like a statue in the middle of a riot. I let them lead me upstairs. I let them put me in the chair. I sat there while the makeup artist tried to cover the dark circles under my eyes, her brushes feeling like needles. I felt like I was being prepared for a sacrifice. I looked at my reflection. The veil was pinned into my hair, the dress was zipped up, that heavy, beautiful embroidery pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked like a bride. I looked perfect, and I felt like I was disappearing. Then, at 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed on the vanity. Every head in the room snapped toward it. My mother lunged for the phone, hoping for a coming home text, but she stopped, her brow furrowing. It's an unknown number. She handed it to me. My fingers were cold as I swiped the screen. Unknown. You deserve to know the truth about the man you were going to marry. The air left the room. My bridesmaids were staring at me, their breath hitched. Me. Who is this? Unknown. Meet me at Harbor Point Café. Now, or you'll never know who Jonathan Pierce really is.
I looked at my mother. I looked at the dress. I looked at the life that was currently a hollowed-out shell. I have to go, I said. Violet, you can't. The guests are arriving in 2 hours. The priest. There is no wedding, Mom, I snapped. The lace on my sleeves felt like it was itching my skin raw. There is no groom. There is only a man named Jonathan who doesn't exist and someone at a cafe who knows why. I didn't take the veil off. I just grabbed a dark hoodie from my closet and pulled it over the white lace. I kicked off my heels and shoved my feet into a pair of old sneakers. I looked like a disaster, a bride hiding under the skin of a stranger. I ran out the back door, the hem of my expensive gown dragging through the wet grass of the lawn we had spent thousands to landscape for the photos. I didn't care. I got in my car and drove. The white tulle of my skirt bunching up around the gear shift, a ghost in the driver's seat.
The Harbor Point Cafe was a relic of a different era. Chipped linoleum floors, the smell of burnt decaf, and windows so thick with sea salt you could barely see the gray Atlantic churning outside. It was the kind of place people went to be forgotten, not found. I pushed through the heavy wooden door, the bell chiming a lonely, metallic note. I felt the weight of the hoodie over my wedding dress, the lace scratching against my collarbone like a reminder of the life I had left behind just 20 minutes ago. My sneakers squeaked on the floor. I looked like a woman who had lost her mind, but inside I felt a terrifying, needle-sharp focus. In the far corner, tucked into a booth where the stuffing was leaking out of the vinyl, sat a woman. She didn't look like a villain, she looked like a survivor. She was in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back into a messy bun that looked like it had been there for days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. When our eyes met, she didn't smile. She just let out a long, shaky breath. "Violet?" Her voice was low and carried a weight that made my knees weak. I slid into the booth opposite her, the tulle of my skirt bunching up under the table, white silk pressing against the grime of the cafe. "I'm Claudette," she said. She didn't offer a hand. She just watched me with a look of profound, crushing pity. "Where is he?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Where is Jonathan?" "He didn't run because he stopped loving you, Violet," she said, her voice trembling. "In his own twisted, broken way, I'm sure he thinks he's protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I leaned forward, the hood of my sweatshirt falling back to reveal the white veil still pinned into my hair. "We were supposed to be married 2 hours from now. He's my life. We have a home. We have a future." "You have a lie," Claudette said. She reached into a worn leather purse and pulled out a single photograph. She placed it face down on the table for a second, her hand resting on top of it. "This is my son," Claudette whispered. "His name is Leo." The world tilted. The sounds of the cafe, the clinking of spoons, the hum of the refrigerator faded into a high-pitched ring. "Jonathan has a child?" I whispered. "Yes." "With you?" Claudette nodded, a tear finally breaking free and rolling down her cheek. "And I'm not his only secret. I'm just the only one who wouldn't stay quiet anymore." I stared at the boy in the photo. He was beautiful. He looked like the future I had imagined having with Jonathan. But he was already here. He was 6 years old. That meant Jonathan had been a father long before he ever met me. He had been a father while he was taking me on our first date. He had been a father while he was proposing to me on that beach in Maui. "I told him his parents died," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "He told me he was alone in the world." "Jonathan is never alone," Claudette said, her voice turning bitter. "He just leaves people behind when they become too heavy to carry. He didn't just abandon us, Violet. He erased us. And today, he realized he couldn't erase you while I was standing in his way." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a thick manila folder. She didn't hand it to me. She just let it sit there, a silent bomb waiting to go off. "There are others, Violet," Claudette said. There are 3 children in total, 3 different women, 3 different cities. He moves every few years. He finds someone kind, someone stable, someone like you. He builds a life until the past starts to catch up, and then he becomes a ghost again. I looked at the folder. I looked at the photo. I thought of my mother at the house, greeting guests. I thought of the cake, the flowers, the I do. I wasn't a bride anymore. I was a witness to a crime. The folder sat between us like a physical weight, cold and heavy. Claudette pushed it toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to run back to my car, drive home, and believe that this was all some elaborate, cruel trick. But the auditor in my soul, the part of me that had always managed our bills and our schedule, knew that a discrepancy this large couldn't be ignored. I opened the flap. The first thing I saw wasn't a photo. It was a birth certificate. Name of child, Leo Jonathan Cole. Name of father, Jonathan David Cole. Cole? I whispered. His name is Pierce, Jonathan Pierce. He changed it 4 years ago, Claudette said, her voice flat, right before he moved to your city. Pierce was his mother's maiden name. He didn't just move, Violet. He rebranded. I turned the page. Another birth certificate. This one was from a city 3 states away. Name of child, Maya Rose Cole. Mother, Sarah Jenkins. Who is Maya? My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an icy hand. That was the one before me, Claudette said. She was the forever before I was. He lived with her for 3 years. He was engaged to her, too. He left 2 weeks after the baby was born. No note, no money. He just walked out to get a pack of cigarettes and never came back. I kept flipping. It was a catalog of abandonment. There were printouts of old social media profiles. Jonathan with shorter hair, Jonathan with a beard, Jonathan standing in front of houses I didn't recognize, with women whose smiles looked exactly like mine did in our engagement photos. The folder contains a shadow ledger of a life lived in cycles. He would find a woman, convince her she was her soulmate, build a domestic sanctuary, and the moment the cargo of real life, children, debt, permanent commitment, became too heavy, he would dump the load and vanish. He moves every few years, Claudette continued, her voice gaining a hard, sharp edge. He gets scared of being known. He loves the beginning, the romance, the us against the world part, but Jonathan doesn't love responsibility. He doesn't love consequences. He loves the version of himself he sees in a new woman's eyes. I looked at a court document from 5 years ago, a petition for child support. It had been returned as undeliverable. Address unknown. I thought about our life. Jonathan had insisted on keeping our bank accounts separate. I thought he was being modern. He refused to post photos of us on social media, claiming he valued his privacy. I thought he was being romantic. He never wanted to talk about his childhood, claiming it was too painful. I thought he was healing. Every single one of those preferences was actually a security measure. He was a man living behind a firewall. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, the anger finally beginning to burn through the numbness. "You knew the wedding date. You knew where I lived." Claudette looked down at her coffee, her hands trembling. "I didn't know you existed until 2 weeks ago, Violet. He contacted me out of nowhere. He said he missed Leo. He came to my apartment, sat on the floor, and cried. He said he was getting married, but he felt like he was suffocating. He actually asked me if I would keep his secret if he started paying me under the table." I felt a surge of nausea. "He tried to buy your silence?" "He tried to pay hush money to keep his clean slate with you," she said. But I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't crying because he loved you. He was crying because the walls were closing in. I told him no. I told him either he told you everything or I would be at that church myself. I sat back, the white lace of my dress feeling like a straitjacket. He hadn't run because he was broken. He had run because the audit had finally caught up to him. He was a man who couldn't handle the
total loss of his reputation. "The shadow ledger is full, Violet," Claudette said, her voice softening. "He's been running for 10 years. You were just supposed to be the next chapter, but the book is finished." I looked out the window at the gray Atlantic. The wedding was supposed to start in an hour. The guests would be sitting in the pews, the music would be playing, and I was sitting in a salt-stained booth reading the criminal history of a man that didn't exist. The silence in the café was broken by a sound that felt like a jagged blade across my skin. My phone, lying face up on the scarred wooden table, began to vibrate. Jonathan. The name on the screen looked like a lie now. It wasn't the name of my fiancé. It was the name of a character in a story I'd been tricked into reading. Claudette saw the screen and went deathly still. She didn't say a word, but her eyes pleaded with me to be the person she needed me to be. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the green icon. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had slowed down to a cold, heavy thud. The bride in me wanted to scream, to beg him to come back and tell me this was a nightmare, but the auditor took over. I needed the final data point. I answered. I didn't say hello. I just waited. "Jonathan?" His voice was a wreck, hoarse, trembling, and thick with the kind of performative grief he had likely used on Sarah and Claudette before me. "Jonathan, are you there?" "I'm here, Jonathan." My voice was a flat line. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had a panic attack. I just started driving and I couldn't stop. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I love you more than anything. You have to believe me." "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm a few towns over. I'm at a rest stop. I just need time. We can reschedule. We can tell everyone I got sick." "I'm sitting at the Harbor Point Café," I interrupted. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding to a halt as he tried to figure out how I knew about this place. "I'm sitting here with Claudette, Jonathan." I looked at the folder spread out on the table, the birth certificates, the names, the abandoned lives. "And I'm looking at a picture of a little boy named Leo who has your eyes. So let's skip the panic attack script. How many children are there?" He heard a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of him sobbing. It wasn't the sob of a man who was sorry for what he'd done. It was the sob of a man who had finally been cornered. "3," he whispered. "3," I repeated. The word felt like lead. "3 children. 3 women, 3 cities you've erased, and I was supposed to be number 4. Was that the plan? Marry me, move me across the country, and hope no one from your past ever knocked on the door?" "I was going to tell you," he cried. "I was terrified you'd leave. I wanted to start over, Violet. I wanted to be the man you thought I was. I love the version of me that lives in your eyes. I didn't want to lose that." "You don't love me, Jonathan." And for the first time, the tears started to burn. "You love the camouflage I provided. You used my life to hide from the consequences of yours. You took away my right to choose my own future because you were too selfish to face your own past." "I can fix it," he begged. "I can pay them. I can keep them separate. We can still be happy." "This is the ultimatum, Jonathan," I said, my voice hardening. "You have 2 choices. You can drive back here right now, walk into that church, and explain to my father and every guest why the wedding is canceled. You can stand in front of Claudette and tell your son why you've been a ghost for 6 years. I can't," he stammered. "I can't face them." "I know. That's choice number 2. You keep running. You keep driving until you find a new city and a new name. But know this, Claudette isn't quiet anymore. I'm not quiet anymore. Your clean slate is over. I'm handing this folder to the police and a lawyer the moment I leave this cafe." "Violet, please." "Goodbye, Jonathan, or whoever you are today." I hung up. I didn't wait for his reaction. I looked at Claudette, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "He's running," I told her. "He always does," she replied. I stood up, the white lace of my wedding dress trailing on the grimy floor. I didn't care about the silk. I didn't care about the dirt. I walked out of the cafe and into the gray morning, leaving the paper husband behind in the shadows of a booth.
In the world of ceremonies, there is a moment right before the music starts where the air feels suspended. It's a vacuum of expectation. I pulled into the gravel lot of the estate 40 minutes after leaving the cafe, and the vacuum was already being filled with the murmur of 300 people. The parking lot was a sea of luxury cars, my father's colleagues, my mother's garden club, friends who had flown in from across the country. They were all dressed in their best, adjusting their ties and smoothing their silk dresses, unaware that they were walking into a theater for a play that had been burned to the ground. I didn't go in through the front. I went through the kitchen entrance, my hood still up, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. I looked like a ghost haunting her own banquet. I found my father in the hallway. He was checking his watch, his face red with a mixture of anger and worry. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "Violet, where have you been? Your mother is nearly catatonic. We have to start. Where is Jonathan? Did you find him?" I reached out and grabbed his arm. My father is a strong man, a man who prides himself on having an answer for every crisis, but I felt him lean into me. "There is no wedding, Dad," I said. My voice was hollow, stripped of everything but the cold, hard facts. "Jonathan isn't coming, and even if he was, I wouldn't marry him. He's been living a lie for 10 years. He has 3 children he abandoned. He isn't even using his real name." The color drained from my father's face. He looked at the hoodie, then at the lace peeking from underneath. He looked at the manila folder I was clutching against my chest like a shield. "I have the proof filed," I whispered. "It's all in here." My father didn't ask to see the folder. He saw the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who had just undergone a forensic audit of her own soul. He didn't yell, he didn't curse, he just took a deep, shuddering breath and straightened his tuxedo jacket. "Stay here," he said. "Don't come out. I'll handle the notice." I watched from behind the heavy velvet curtains of the ballroom as my father walked out onto the dais where the priest was waiting. The music, a soft, hopeful string quartet, faltered and then stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed, though I could hear the slight tremor in it, "I am sorry to inform you that the wedding between Violet and Jonathan will not be taking place today. Circumstances have come to light that make this union impossible. We ask for your respect and your privacy as we navigate this total loss of our expectations." The sound that followed was a collective gasp, followed by the frantic, low-volume buzzing of 300 people whispering at once. It sounded like a hive of disturbed bees. "The reception is canceled. The staff will assist you in reclaiming your coats. Please, just go home." I stood in the shadows, watching them leave. I watched my bridesmaids, the girls who had been dreaming of this day with me, looking around with tear-streaked faces. I watched the florist begin to pack up the arrangements. I watched the life I had spent 18 months building being disassembled by people in black vests. It was a final notice. The contract was voided. The shipment was rejected. I went to the bridal suite and finally took off the hoodie. I looked at the dress in the full-length mirror. It was a masterpiece of lace and silk, but it felt like a shroud. I reached back and began to unbutton the long row of tiny pearl buttons. My fingers were shaking, but I did it myself, one by one. I stepped out of the white silk and left it lying in a heap on the floor, looking like the skin of a snake that had finally been shed. I didn't cry. I just sat there in my slip, staring at the empty room, listening to the sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot. The audit of my life was complete.
The results were catastrophic, but as I sat there, I realized that for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't breathing in the fumes of a lie. I was breathing in the cold, sharp air of the truth.
The weeks following the total loss were a blur of silence and shadow. I didn't go back to the house Jonathan and I had shared, not at first. I stayed in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I had received those 7 words. My mother moved like a ghost through the hallways, removing the floral arrangements that had begun to wilt, her silence a heavy weight of shared shame. But eventually, the questions became too loud to ignore. I needed to know what else I had missed. I needed to see the paper trail of the man I thought I loved. I returned to our apartment on a Tuesday. The air inside was stale, smelling of the expensive sandalwood candles Jonathan liked to burn. It looked perfect, a magazine spread of a life. His shoes were still by the door, his coffee mug was still on the counter, but as I walked through the rooms, the bride was gone. Only the auditor remained. I went straight to his home office. Jonathan had always kept the door locked, claiming he dealt with sensitive client data. I didn't use a key. I used a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer. When the lock clicked open, the room felt cold, as if the lies themselves had dropped the temperature. I started with the desk. It was meticulously organized, but as I began to pull out the drawers, I realized the organization was a defense mechanism. Behind a false back in the bottom drawer, I found a small black firebox. I didn't have the code, but I knew Jonathan. He was a creature of habit. I tried the date we met. Nothing. I tried our intended wedding date. Nothing. Then I tried a sequence of numbers I'd seen him doodle on a notepad once. 06 12 18. The box clicked. Inside wasn't money, it was a collection of erasures. There were 3 different driver's licenses from 3 different states, each with his face but a different name. Jonathan Cole, Jonathan Miller, Jonathan Pierce. There were burner phones, each labeled with a city name: Atlanta, Chicago, Phoenix. But the most chilling discovery was a small leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary of feelings, it was a manual for his disappearances. He had written down the rules for his reinventions. Rule 1, never mention a specific high school. Rule 2, cash only for the first 6 months in a new city. Rule 3, find a woman with a stable family. They provide the best cover. My stomach lurched. I wasn't his partner, I was his Rule 3. I was the camouflage he used to blend into a respectable life. I turned the pages and found a list of names, women's names: Sarah, Claudette, Michelle, and then at the bottom of the list was mine, Violet. Next to my name, he had written, "The most convincing one yet." Almost believed it myself. I sat on the floor of the office, surrounded by the evidence of a decade-long heist. He hadn't just stolen my time, he had stolen my reality. Every "I love you" was a calculated move to keep the mask in place. Every plan for our future was just a way to ensure I wouldn't look too closely at his past. I realized then that the paper husband had been meticulously constructed. He hadn't left a trail I missed because I was blind. He had left a trail that was designed to be invisible to anyone who loved him. Love was the blindfold he provided for every woman he met. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. I just started making copies. I scanned every license, every phone, every page of that journal. If Jonathan wanted to be a ghost, I was going to make sure he was a ghost with a very public record. The investigation wasn't about getting him back. It was about making sure the paper husband could never be printed again. In the world of the paper husband, isolation was the ultimate weapon. Jonathan counted on our shame to keep us quiet. He banked on the idea that we would be too embarrassed, too broken, or too busy surviving to ever find one another. He assumed that once he vanished, we would simply curl into ourselves and let the memory of him fade like a bad dream. But as I sat in the cold light of his office, looking at the list of names in his journal, I realized his greatest mistake wasn't running, it was leaving the map behind. I started with Michelle. Her name was written right before Claudette's. According to his notes, she was in Phoenix. I found her on social media within an hour. Her profile picture was a little girl with Jonathan's distinct amber-flecked eyes and that same slight tilt of the head when she smiled. I didn't send a long emotional message. I sent a photo of the journal page with her name on it and a single sentence. "He did it to me too. My name is Violet. We were supposed to get married yesterday." My phone rang 3 minutes later. "He's a ghost," Michelle said. There was no greeting, just the raw, jagged voice of a woman who had been living with the haunting for 5 years. "I thought I was the only one. I thought I did something wrong to make him walk out." "He didn't leave because of us, Michelle," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "He left because he's a hollow man, and I have the names of the others. Claudette is already with me. We're building a record of everyone he's tried to delete." Over the next week, the alliance of the erased grew. We formed a group chat that felt like a secret sanctuary. We shared photos, birth certificates, and the specific lies he told each of us. It was a chilling experience, seeing the same romantic stories recycled across a decade. He had told Michelle his parents died in a house fire. He told Sarah they drowned. He told me it was a car accident. He was a playwright who only had one script, and we were just the actors he replaced every few years when he got bored of the role. We realized that Jonathan wasn't just a runaway, he was a collector of lives. He looked for women who were established, women with deep roots and families, because we were the perfect place for him to hide. We didn't just provide love, we provided the respectability he couldn't create on his own. "He's in Seattle," Sarah messaged one evening. She had been watching an old email account he'd forgotten to sign out of on a tablet she kept in her kitchen. "He's using the name Jonathan Reed now. He's already working at a marketing firm, and he was just seen at a local gallery opening with a woman named Claire." My blood ran cold. He was already beginning the cycle again. He was already weaving a new net for Claire, telling her she was an orphan, telling her she was the only person who truly understood him. "We can't just call her," Claudette said during one of our late-night calls. "He'll just tell her we're crazy exes. He's so good at making himself look like the victim. He's probably already told her he had a stalker from his past." "We don't call her," I said, looking at the scanned pages of his journal. "We provide the proof. We don't act like angry women. We act like the truth he thought he could outrun." We spent the next few days compiling everything, every birth certificate, every different driver's license, every page of his journal where he'd planned his exits. We were no longer victims waiting for an apology that would never come. We were a coalition, and we were about to shine a light on a man who thought he could live forever in the dark. I felt a strange sense of belonging with these women. We were bonded by the same scar, but for the first time, that scar wasn't a source of shame. Jonathan thought he erased us, but instead he turned us into the only people in the world who truly knew who he was. The flight to Seattle felt like a journey into a different dimension. Claudette and I sat side by side, our hands occasionally brushing against the manila folder that now contained the wreckage of Jonathan's decade of lies. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The engine's hum was the only sound that matched the steady, cold rhythm of my heart. We weren't going there to scream. We weren't going there to beg him to come home. We were going there to perform a final, public unveiling. Sarah had done the legwork. She had found the address of the marketing firm where Jonathan Reed was currently building his new pedestal. She had even found the date of their office launch party, a high-profile event at a rooftop lounge overlooking the Puget Sound. It was the perfect stage for a man who loved to be seen as successful, unburdened, and new. When we arrived at the venue, the air was crisp and smelled of rain and expensive perfume. I was wearing a simple black dress, the polar opposite of the white lace that was still boxed up in my mother's basement. Claudette walked beside me, her jaw set, her eyes fixed forward. We stepped out of the elevator and into a room filled with laughter, clinking champagne flutes, and the soft pulse of jazz. And there he was. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, framed by the city lights. He looked spectacular. He was wearing a charcoal suit I'd never seen, his hair trimmed perfectly, a glass of bourbon in one hand. Beside him was Claire, a woman with a kind face and a bright, trusting smile. He was leaning in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh and lean her head against his shoulder. It was the exact same pose he'd struck with me at the rehearsal dinner, the exact same tilt of a head. It was a recycled masterpiece. I felt Claudette's hand tighten on my arm. "Look at him," she whispered. "He looks like he doesn't have a care in the world." I said, "Because he thinks we don't exist anymore." We walked toward them. The crowd seemed to part instinctively, sensing the sudden shift in the room's temperature. Jonathan didn't see us at first. He was too busy being the man of the hour. It wasn't until we were 5 feet away that he looked up. The transition on his face was something I will never forget. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a total system collapse. The glass in his hand didn't fall, but his fingers gripped it so hard I thought the crystal would shatter. The color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a statue made of ash. "Jonathan," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the jazz like a blade. Claire looked at me, her smile faltering. "I'm sorry, can I help you?" "I'm Violet," I said, looking directly at her, though I could feel Jonathan's frantic, silent pleading. "And this is Claudette. We aren't here to make a scene, Claire. We're here to give you something Jonathan forgot to mention." I held out the folder. Jonathan finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled thing. "Jonathan, Claudette, please, not here. We can talk outside. Claire, honey, they're people from my old job. They're upset about a project." "A project?" Claudette stepped forward, her voice trembling with years of suppressed pain. "Is that what you call your son, Jonathan? A project? Is that what you call the families you leave behind every time you want a clean slate?" The room went silent. People began to turn, their conversations dying out. Claire looked from Claudette to the folder, her eyes wide with a growing, horrific clarity. She reached out and took the papers. As she flipped through the birth certificates, the names Cole, Miller, Pierce, and now Reed, Jonathan began to back away. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He was a cornered animal looking for a hole to crawl into. "3 children?" Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "You told me you were an orphan. You told me you were alone." "I am alone," Jonathan burst out, his mask finally cracking. "I had to be alone. You don't understand what it's like to carry all that weight. I just wanted to be happy. I just wanted to start over." "You don't get to start over by stepping on the people who loved you," I said. I stepped closer until I was inches from him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, echoing pity. "You aren't a ghost, Jonathan. You're just a man who is too small for his own life." Claire didn't say anything. She just dropped the folder at his feet. The papers scattered across the polished floor, the birth certificates, the journal pages, the paper husband laid bare for the entire room to see. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, final rhythm against the floor.
Jonathan stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of his own cowardice, as the people he had spent months impressing began to pull away from him like he was contagious. He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, ugly resentment. "You ruined it! You destroyed everything!" "No," I said, turning to walk away with Claudette. "I just stopped the cycle. The paper trail ends here."
The air in Seattle felt different as we walked out of that building. Sharper, colder, but finally clean. For years, Jonathan had operated on the assumption that if he ran fast enough, the bridge behind him would simply cease to exist. He hadn't counted on the fact that the people he left in the wreckage would eventually learn how to build a bridge of their own. But exposure was only the beginning. The Alliance didn't just want him to stop. We wanted him to feel the weight of every life he had tried to discard. We coordinated with the authorities across 4 different states, handing over the journal, the literal manual of his crimes. Because he had used multiple social security numbers and forged documents to create his aliases, the situation shifted from a civil matter of runaway dad to a criminal case of identity fraud and systemic deception. The paper husband didn't just lose his fiancé, he lost his freedom. Jonathan was arrested 3 days after the gallery opening. Because he was considered a high flight risk, given that his entire life was a masterclass in disappearing, he was denied bail. For the first time in his life, Jonathan couldn't drive away. He was trapped in a box, forced to face the records of every person he had erased. The legal proceedings were grueling, but for us, they were a cleansing fire. Because he had crossed state lines to evade child support and used fraudulent identities to gain employment, the federal charges piled up. The court didn't just garnish his wages, they liquidated the hidden accounts we discovered through his journal. Every cent he had hoarded to fund his next clean slate was seized and distributed to the mothers of his children. I remember seeing him in the courtroom. He looked small. Without the expensive suits, without the staged smiles and the rehearsed charm, he was just a hollow man in an orange jumpsuit. He tried to look at me, his eyes searching for that old spark of pity he used to manipulate so well. I looked back, and I felt nothing but the satisfaction of a corrected record. He was sentenced to several years in a federal facility for identity theft and fraud, followed by a lifetime of supervised release and a permanent public record that no alias could ever scrub away. He had wanted to be a ghost, so the world made him a number. For me, the fallout was more internal. I moved out of the apartment we had shared, selling everything that felt like it was made of shadows. I went back to my career, throwing myself into work not to hide, but to remember who I was before I became Jonathan's fiancé. I spent time with Claudette and Michelle, seeing the children, his children, blossom now that their futures were finally secured by the funds he had tried to keep for himself. One afternoon, I sat on my new balcony, looking out at a sunset that wasn't filtered through the lens of a wedding plan. The pain was still there, a dull ache where a future used to be, but the panic was gone. I wasn't waiting for a text message anymore. I wasn't listening for a car in the driveway. I was learning that you don't find yourself by finding the right person. You find yourself by surviving the wrong one. Jonathan hadn't just disappeared that night before our wedding. He had inadvertently handed me the keys to my own life. I had spent 4 years being the perfect supporting character in his play, but as the prison doors locked behind him, I realized I was finally the lead in my own story. 2 years later, the scent of white peonies no longer made me flinch. I stood in my garden, not in a wedding dress, but in a simple linen shirt, the soil under my fingernails feeling grounding and real. The paper husband was a closed chapter, a story told in a courtroom that now felt like it belonged to a different woman. Jonathan was still serving his time, but his name had faded from my daily thoughts. Every now and then, I'd get an update from Claudette, The kids were doing well, the support payments from the seized assets were helping them build lives Jonathan had tried to deny them. But the most significant change in my world wasn't what I had lost, it was who had stayed. Paul was the only one who truly understood the wreckage. As Jonathan's former best friend, he had dealt with his own version of the betrayal, the realization that his brother was a fiction. We had started meeting for coffee months after the wedding, at first just to exchange information, but slowly the conversation shifted. We stopped talking about the man who ran and started talking about the people who remained. Paul didn't offer me a grand cinematic romance. He offered me something much more valuable: consistency. He showed up when he said he would. He didn't have hidden folders or secret names. He had flaws, and he was honest about them. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the fireflies, Paul looked at me and said the words that finally clicked the last lock into place. "You know," he whispered, "I used to feel guilty for not seeing it, for not stopping him from hurting you. But then I realized Jonathan didn't ruin your life, Violet. He just revealed who never deserved to be in it." It was the truth I had been searching for. I realized then that my worst night hadn't been a tragedy, it had been a rescue mission. If Jonathan hadn't sent that text, if he hadn't panicked and run, I would have married a man who would have spent the next 40 years slowly erasing me. I would have had children with a ghost. I would have built a house on a foundation of sand. His disappearance was the greatest gift he ever gave me. He spared me from a lifetime of being an unknowing accomplice to his lies. I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I didn't see a woman who had been abandoned at the altar. I saw a woman who had survived a disaster disguised as a dream. I was whole, I was safe, and for the first time, my future wasn't a script written by someone else. It was a blank page, and I finally had the right pen to write it. The paper husband was gone. The real life had finally begun. Violet's journey is a powerful reminder that sometimes the person walking out of your life is actually the universe doing you a massive favor. It's hard to see that when you're standing in a wedding dress in an empty church, but as the truth comes out, the weight begins to lift. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a blessing in disguise breakup? A moment where someone leaving felt like the end of the world, only for you to realize later that they were actually a disaster you narrowly escaped? Drop a comment below. Let's support each other in the comments. Sometimes sharing your story is the final step in your own audit of the past. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button. It helps us reach more people who might be sitting in their own Chapter 1 right now, needing to know that Chapter 12 is coming. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join our community. We tell stories that dig deep into the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm your narrator, and this was The Man Who Wasn't There. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your heart guarded, and remember, you are always worth the truth. I'll see you in the next one.